Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So what is it? What is the most important lesson, teaching of the Dharma, of Buddhism? What is the one concept that all of the rest of Buddhism is about, is leading to, is training to understand? What is all this practice about? What is the ultimate goal? What is the one most important thing to know in all of Buddhist teachings? Do you know? There are a lot of important things. I want to make a bunch of analogies here. Why not? I'll use the math analogy again in a different way. Usually it's used to demonstrate the sequence of teachings, the different depths of teachings, the way the teachings stack on top of one another. All of those things are part of the math analogy, right? But I want to, because this gosho, this thought, this point of contention, this most important concept of Buddhism, you could say, is the fundament of the entire of the 80,000 teachings and the 12 divisions and on and on. Like mathematics, the point isn't the mathematics. The point isn't the sequence. The point isn't how one teaching stands above the previous to get you to an ultimate teaching. Even the ultimate teaching isn't the point. The point is about why, what, where, how, when. The point is, what's your life for? Right? Insert big questions here. Who am I? Why am I here? What are we doing? What is life for? All of that, right? This is why we humans invented mathematics and language and poetry and art, astronomy, particle physics, quantum field theory. It isn't about those things. Those things are about understanding, appreciating, being able to embrace the largesse of this amazing experience that we can't fully define. Not even with as meticulous as we have been with language. We're always having to point to things outside ourselves to then once again look in ourselves. How many specials on TV or movies have you seen that say, well, we've never inspected the oceans. We know less about the oceans than we do about our solar system that we're in, or our planetary system, right? Our solar system, or our galaxy for that matter. How many times do we look at programs and look at the utter fascination of the way organisms work, especially the human, but any organism, the way cells divide, the way things seem to continue with similar information and divergence, and all of anthropology let alone you know, brain surgery, neurology, right? All of it's important, all of it's fascinating, all of it's amazing, all of it is discovery. But for what? So, Nichiren make this is a ridiculously short Go show. There are shorter ones to be sure, but the reason I say it's ridiculously short is because it's about the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And the reason I'm introducing it this way is because even with everything that we've read together and that I've talked about, my playlist on the Lotus lectures of every chapter of the introductory and Lotus Sutra and the closing sutra, the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings opening to the Lotus Sutra, and other sutras that I've reviewed, the Lankavatara, the Vilamakirti, and so on. I'm going to, the Avatamsaka or Kigon or Flower Garland Sutra is massive, and I've read it a couple of times. And I don't know if I'm ready to go through that yet, because I think all of this other stuff helps to open our minds to what the Flower Garland Sutra was really all about. And actually, it was all about this, in so many words. And so maybe after I do this, there's a lot of Go show yet to go. I want to read just a little bit out of the Lankavatara Sutra to kind of prep you for something. I really want you to get this. I might need to turn another light on in order to be able to read this. In our contemporary world, and I think I'm going to turn that light on right now, so I'm going to pause this. Okay, sorry about that, but now the light's on, you can probably tell. So I have a playlist on my channel that's dedicated to the origins of life, or the 3,000 realms in a single moment, thought moment. So what is it? A thought or a moment or life? A single moment of life or a single thought moment? What I'm about to read will answer that. I'm always struggling on where to start with this because it's difficult to talk about, especially to the even, science. Ooh, I said a bad word. Science today, in our era, has shifted, and it's shifted several times over the centuries. There was a time when science was simply a pursuit of understanding the forces around us, the forces of nature. Much like a native tribesperson would understand that they found their food if they were coastal indigenous peoples, they would find their food from the water through fishing. And so they had a great respect and reverence for the thing that availed them of food to survive. So they deified things like the waters, the ocean, the fish themselves, right? They had great reverence for great eagles and ravens. Watching these eagles, I can tell you from my own experience in the Northwest, visiting the Makah Indian reservation and the ends of their amazing civilization. Is anyway, story for another day. But I watched the eagles, an enormous, beautiful, majestic bird, just floating along and then suddenly diving and coming up out of the water with a fish bigger than I usually catch, and then flying away into the trees to go chow down. Amazing to watch that, right? So, science starts from the same place that talks about the ether, and tries to nail things down to transform from an ethos. I don't want to use the word spiritual because that implies something else, but the idea that from the environment then are manifested these forms, these things, the idea of thingness, and that everything comes from this kind of huge repository of energy. And then there's a shift toward, like the industrial age, everything is material. So now we start to label those things that we used to call this large ether, we call it particles. And we can give them properties, and everything's materialistically experienced. Even intelligence and consciousness, you've heard the arguments, they're just firing chemicals in the brain because chemistry is very material oriented. But chemistry walks the line because it has valence bonding and electrical actions, and you can't study chemistry without delving into a bit of the mysterious nature of energy and how it is or it isn't, how it manifests into potential energy or kinetic energy or so on and so forth. Biology, it uses chemistry, but it's a little bit more materialistically bound. And then you get into physics and particle physics and even quantum, and everything's from a point of view of material. But Buddhism, 2,700 years old, and prior to Buddhism, but certainly in Buddhism, the cosmology of Buddhism, the understanding of Buddhism of how everything happens, period, universe, world, you, whatever, starts from potential. It's in ancient Chinese writings. This idea in Chinese called Wu or Wu Ji, a space of no extremities. In fact, it's symbolized as a circle, but the circle is just a provisional symbol because it really is. It's a dot. It's everything. It's a place of a place, an area of a condition of potential without anything manifest. So in the West, we would say that is like a quiescent energy. The energy is at a state of almost complete rest. It's not even humming. It's just sort of awaiting some interaction of some sort. We have, I'm sure you've heard in your lifetime about string theory. There are different levels of string theory, but at their most complex, they get to something called branes, B-R-A-N-E-S. And they talk about, and there's other descriptive words here beyond just the brains, but I can't remember it right now. But this idea that these uncalculable areas, fields of energy that are quiescent, really, happen to at some point run like ships in the night, vast, huge ships. You know how they can't steer, right? They can, but I mean, it takes many miles for them to change course. So picture these brains that are vaster than any universe that we understand, touching or running into one another. That point where those energy fields meet creates a huge amount of disturbance, and it is theorized that could easily spawn something that looks a lot like what we tend to call the Big Bang, where all of these energies seem to be in a very confined space and quickly expand, right? conformal cyclical cosmology. Roger Penrose is a renowned physicist who has this idea of how the universe, once it expands to a certain points and black holes give off all their Hawking radiations and evaporate, there nothing will be left but random photons. And when there's only photons, there is only energy. And when there's only energy, there is no matter. And when there is no matter, then there's no time. Or in his words, there's no clock. But what that really means is there's no time. So if there's no time, then there's no space. So as vast as the universe might seem at that moment, since it has no matter in it, it's irrelevant. Time becomes not time. So in that moment, we have again a restart of a Big Bang, where the densities of that energy spawn matter that then has to occupy space and therefore explodes in inflation, creating with it time, and we start all over again. So his hypothesis is that it's a constantly expanding and then conformally confined, therefore it starts over, and that each universe carries with it a lot of the information that was extant in the one before it, but forms slightly differently. Check out the cosmic background radiation. You'll see variances in it. Small, but there. Anyway, so you may think I'm going wildly off topic here, but I just want to get your mind around the idea that from these potential energies come interactions that slowly, because of their nature, because of their conditions and tendencies, and that millisecond of interaction, nanoseconds, smaller time periods, Planck seconds, that they influence one another. They don't all react exactly in the same way. Just like when you bump into somebody in the hallway. You've bumped into people many times in your life, but not every one of them have been exactly the same. Some have caused you to drop things. Some have been more violence. Others have been just slightly brushing, right? You get the point? And so from that instigation of thingness beget other things, and they have different properties. And if you followed each one out to their eventual manifestation or falling apart, you could trace each one of them individually with their own characteristics. This is what is described in the early teachings as the 12 Nidana, the 12-linked causal chain. And I've talked about this before, but this is the process, if you will, of these interactions of potentials interlocking and interacting in order to precipitate something, whether that something is energy or a kidney or a cell or a molecule or an atom or an up quark or a down quark. It starts at that level. And then those interact and they make protons. And the protons, some go one way, some go another, and they end up becoming neutrons. And then electrons are just emergent in that. And so, yeah, I don't want to talk about, we talk about the speed of time, but that's really just a human reference for what we observe in our time scales. So there is a time when time breaks down, and there is no time. I already described that in the cyclical cosmology, right? Buddhism, believe it or not, Shakyamuni talked about this exact thing very early on. And this is why the people around him just looked at him like, what are you talking about? But this is deeply within Buddhist cosmology and thinking and commentary. Read Nagarjuna, read Vasubandhu, read on the skandhas, the five skandhas, read on any of these components of Buddhism, and you'll take a deep dive into the nature of reality. But Buddhism spends an inordinate amount of time talking about all these different aspects of nature, of the mind, of consciousnesses, like eye consciousness and feeling consciousness, and don't mix those up with sensations. That's not what Buddhism is talking about, right? It's always about interrelationships between, in the duality of environment, self environment. Really, they're not dual, they're the same thing, but they only are there because thing exists, right? And the fundamental of Buddhism is that the idea that thing exists is the problem, because if there's a thing, then there's something that must perceive the thing. And the thing that perceives the thing wants to justify that it perceives. And by justifying that it perceives, it gives itself value because it can perceive. And from there you get ego, self, the rest of it. Okay? So, the ultimate teaching of Buddhism isn't to erase all of that. And there's so many misinterpretations in that regard. I want to meditate and stop thinking. I want to stop my mind from thinking. Thought is bad. Thought is in the way. Thought is what keeps me human. Thought is, the mind is, blah, blah, blah. That's all horse crap, okay? Or horse pucky, if you'd rather. I'm not against using flowery language because it's just language. It can't hurt you. Okay? So, what's the point? We can talk around it a lot of different ways, but I think I'm going to read something out of the Lankavatara Sutra to get your, now that I've done all this babbling. And then we're going to read the Gosho on the lifespan chapter. Because I think the wording, and especially the translations of the Lotus Sutra, I think there's a tendency in Western scholarship to, especially with popular texts like the Lotus Sutra, to make it and certainly with Nichiren's teachings, to make them more westernized, to make them more story-like. And I think that does a disservice to Buddhism, but, you know, I can't argue that that may be what entertains a lot of people to start Buddhism. Unfortunately, it's easy to miss the mark doing that. And I think if I read this Lankavatara translation, this, I think, more scholarly, I think that then when we read together the Gosho on the lifespan chapter, things will start to fall into place a little bit more accurately. All right? So, here I go. I'm wearing the wrong glasses. I'm a mess today, aren't I? Okay, chanted a bit more Daimoku before going on, now that I have the correct glasses on, so I can read. Here we go. I'm just going to start. This is in chapter 2. Further, Mahamati, there are two kinds of intellect. The intellect that has an examining function, and the intellect which functions in connection with the attachment to ideas of discrimination. As for the intellect that examines, Mahamati, it is that act of intellect which examines into the self-nature of things, finding it to be devoid of the four propositions and unattainable. This is known as the intellect that examines. What is meant by being devoid of the four propositions? It means to be devoid of oneness and otherness, bothness and not bothness, being and not being, eternity and non-eternity. These are called the four propositions. So what he's identifying here, these four propositions, can only occur once the nidana has begun. So start from my quiescent energy analogy, and only once there begin to be interactions in those energies can we have anything assembling formations. Formations is a key word here. He hasn't used it yet, but in these being, not being, bothness, not bothness, oneness and other, in other words, selfness or oneness or the thing in and of itself, in order to have a thing, there has to be something that the thing isn't. If that condition doesn't exist, then there is nothing, right? There is only Wu-Ji. There is only quiescent energy. So this initiates, or is in the initiation of, all right? So these are called the four propositions, Mahamati. Train yourself to examine carefully all things as regards these four propositions. So what he's now saying is that everything you can observe, from behavior to attitudes to plants to human beings to atomic reactions, whatever, observe them through the lens of knowing their formations, their initial transcendence from nothing to something. Nothing not being a very good word to use, but I hope you understand what I mean when I say it. What Mahamati is the intellect which functions in connection with the attachment to ideas of discrimination. It is the intellect with which the mind is discriminated, and the ideas arising therefrom are adhered to as real. And this adherence gives rise to the conceptions of warmth, fluidity, motility, and solidity as characterizing the gross elements, while the tenacious holding to propositions, reason, definition, and illustration leads to the assertion of a non-entity as entity. This is called the intellect that functions in connection with the attachment to ideas of discrimination. So he's going on down the process here, saying once there's a consciousness that perceives, that makes discriminations, distinctions, that sees one thing and one thing that is not that one thing is another thing, and so on and so forth, then and only then can you perceive a self, right? Because you are one thing that is not the other thing. This, Mahamati, is what characterizes the two kinds of intellect. In accord with the Bodhisattvas, thoroughly mastering the signs of egolessness of persons and things, I'm not making this up, and by means of knowledge of imagelessness, becoming conversant with the stage of examination and practice, will attain the first stage of Buddhahood and acquire 100 dhyanas. Attaining the excellent samadhis, they will see 100 Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They will enter into 100 kalpas that were prior to the present, and also into those that will follow the present. They will illuminate 100 Buddha lands, and illuminating 100 Buddha lands, they will understand the signs belonging to the higher stages, and by virtue of the most exalted vows, they will manifest wonderful powers. They will be baptized by the Buddhas when they reach the stage of Dharma Mega, law cloud, and realizing the inmost realm of the Tathagatas. They will be provided with things which are closely connected with the 10 inexhaustible vows, and in order to bring all beings into maturity, they will shine out in various forms with the rays of transformation. They will be quite absorbed in the bliss of self-realization, self-manifestation, something I talked about and I did a recent video about. All of this will make more sense in a bit, but the language here is very different than what you read in the Lotus Sutra, isn't it? Or Gosho's, for that matter. It's a little bit more technical almost. and this is an older scholastic translation of a Mahayana text, right? The Lankavatara Sutra. I'll show you the, okay? Further, Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas are to be well acquainted with the primary and secondary elements. How do the Bodhisattvas know the primary and secondary elements? Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas are to know that this is the truth, or that the truth is that the primary elements have never come into existence. And that, Mahamati, these elements are unborn. Thus understood, there is nothing in the world but what is discriminated by our imagination. When it is recognized that the visible world is no more than mind itself, external objects cease to be realities, and there is nothing but what is discriminated by the mind and perceived as external. That is to say, let it be understood that the triple world has nothing to do with the primary and secondary elements, that it is removed from the four propositions and philosophical systems, that it has nothing to do with a personal ego and what belongs to it, and what it establishes, and that it establishes itself in the abode of real reality, where it is seen in its own form, i.e., in its unborn state. Okay. I could keep reading because this sutra just, it's exciting to me. But I think I read enough for you to start to maybe get the point here as we move forward. What Shakyamuni is talking about here, and what Mahayana later stage teachings of Shakyamuni are all discussing now, is not only the nature of being, but the nature of being as antecedent, as an effect of prior. And what is prior is Wu-Ji. What is prior is quiescence. What is prior is not this. As soon as there's discriminations, those, his own words, occur in the mind. Thought. Thought creates a perceived reality in direct opposition to what we know is that real reality is not any of this. This is real in the sense that we experience it, but we experience it through our minds, through thought. Okay, so now let's think back to 3,000 realms in a single thought moment versus 3,000 realms in a moment of life. They're really the same statement, aren't they? Except that to say there are 3,000 realms in a single moment of life kind of leads you away from all of this thinking. Whereas 3,000 realms in a single thought moment kind of nails this a little better, I think. Because it focuses your mind on the process of your mind instantiating these things. Without the mind, these things are unborn. This is some radical thinking. Okay? So, with that, now as we read, and I'm not going to reread the Lotus Sutra's lifespan chapter, I have videos on that already, but this is the Gosho on the essence of the lifespan chapter, not the whole chapter, but the essence of it, which is what I've been leading up to here. So Nichiren writes, when Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, expounded the lifespan chapter, he referred to what all living beings had heard in the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings and in the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra. He said, quote, in all the worlds, the heavenly and human beings and Asuras all believe that the present Shakyamuni Buddha, after leaving the palace of the Shakyas, seated himself in the place of meditation not far from the city of Gaia, and there attained supreme perfect enlightenment, end quote. Right? This is the consistent story we get outside of Buddhism and in Buddhism about Siddhartha leaving the castle, seeing pain and suffering and old age and death, and resolved himself in life to find an answer to suffering, human suffering. So this is what he's recounting. And he's recounting that at some point in his travels to find that answer, he ended up seated at the Bodhi tree and attained supreme perfect enlightenment there. And so this, as a man, was the first instance of enlightenment, of Buddhahood, and he is the guy who embodies that, right? This is what everyone believes. Even in the beginning of the Lotus Sutra, these statements are made. So Nichiren goes on to say, this statement expresses the idea held by all the Buddha's disciples and the great bodhisattvas from the time they heard Shakyamuni preach his first sermon in the Flower Garland Sutra, up through the time he expounded the Peaceful Practices chapter of the Lotus Sutra, so the first half of the Lotus Sutra. We find two flaws in the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings. First, quote, because the 10 worlds are separate from one another in these teachings, they fail to move beyond the provisional. So that's another key. In all of the previous sutras, we talked about the 3 lower paths and the hells of incessant suffering and all these different worlds as separate entities, right? But it is only in the Lotus Sutra that we learn that all those worlds are within each of the worlds. So you can be in the hell of Buddhahood, or the Bodhisattva of anger. Okay? These interdependent worlds also manifest through the 10 factors and the 3 realms. This is where we get 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. I'll continue. That is, they do not reveal the doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. That of discarding the provisional and revealing the true, or that of persons of the 2 vehicles being capable of attaining Buddhahood. The doctrines related to the 10 factors of life stated in the Expedient Means chapter of the theoretical teaching, which is why we recite that second chapter in our Gongyo. You remember those 10 factors? Nyose so, nyose in, nyose en, nyose ka, nyose ho, so on and so forth. That's the 10 factors. Second, quote, because they teach that Shakyamuni first attained enlightenment in this world, they fail to discard the Buddha's provisional sutras, or status, the provisional status. This is it. This is hitting the nail on the head right here. Thus, they do not reveal the Buddha's original enlightenment in the remote past expounded in the lifespan chapter. These 2 great doctrines, the attainment of Buddhahood by persons of the 2 vehicles and the Buddha's original enlightenment, are the core of the Buddha's lifetime teachings, the heart and marrow of all the sutras. So that's why I titled this talk the way I did, and that's why I'm trying to get you to understand in this short paragraph. When he talks about discard the Buddha's provisional status. Throughout all teachings of Buddhism, Shakyamuni is called Buddha because he's the first to attain that life state or mind state. And he is treated as an individual embodiment of that. So he's a separate, an other. But something I want you to notice about almost everything you read in sutra form is in the first person. Thus I heard starts everything. I am this, I am that. I saw in the land of this. I saw, and when I was here, and I was that. Everything he's sermonized was in the first person. Knowing full well that the transmission, the way of transmission in those days was not written down. It was all oral. So how did you learn Buddhism from Shakyamuni? You repeated the words in the first person. So every single practicant of Buddhism was saying, I did this, and I did that, and I did that. From the get-go, Shakyamuni was trying to drive home the point that this isn't about me. This isn't about Buddha, the man, Buddha, the guy who got there. This is about I. It's about your Buddhism, your Buddhahood, your Buddha nature. And you transcend time. Right? The other point that Nichiren makes about even people of the two vehicles attaining Buddhahood, that's an abstract reference to the fact that in the full teaching of Buddhism, Buddhism is available and inherent in every sentient and insentient beings. But let's not get into insentience yet. That's a whole nother mind blower. Let's just concentrate on us humans. This Buddha nature, this Buddha mind is, look, if you make tea or Coca-Cola or a milkshake, you could break that down chemically until you get to water, can you not? Everything comes from the water. Even if you make a beverage out of rocks, you're going to pulverize it to the point that you liquefy it, right? And you're going to mix it with water so it's mud instead of just rock. My point is, from the origin of everything spawned of that origin has some component of that origin in it. Make sense? So if the origin is quiescent energy, and through the process of nidana, instantiations are formed, that then, and you'll have to watch my many videos on that. Otherwise this video will never end. But to follow that process through its conclusion of human consciousness is to realize that not only are you conscious and able to have a discriminating intellect to tell things apart, but with that intellect you can turn it in itself to first realize that all of it itself is precipitated from this original Buddhahood, this formless, suchnessless, equal, all-pervasive, non-thing, just potential. This quiescent energy, it's in us right now. We have cells manufacturing themselves in us right now. We have DNA, which is programmed to help develop those cells into other kinds of cells that we need to replace within our body. There's an entire intellect in our body that we pay no attention to, that is already hard at work instantiating things to keep the engine going. Our Buddhahood is working within us right now. So is the 12 Nidana, constantly at work from moment to moment. Life is created in each moment a birth and a death, a falling away and a recombination, a transfer from one moment to another. And we talk about streams of consciousness, right? We're talking about thought streams. So when you meditate, it's not about ending the processes of your brain or your mind. We don't want death when we meditate. We want to interrupt the stream of thoughts to turn their focus into one place. We want to refocus our mind's stream of thoughts to perceive and swim within, if you will, the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. This non-duality that is active in this enormously complex duality. This is why I say to you, you can only experience your Buddha mind while in your human mind. Because it only is through experience that we can experience. Without experience, then Buddha mind is irrelevant to us. So, though it may be there, quiescent energy all around us, whether we call it dark energy in the universe because we're trying to explain our material observations, or elsewhere, its presence is always here. Knowing that its presence is here, knowing at a deep, profound level that it is here, makes everything else secondary. Not less important, but less primary, less worthy of our constant attached focus, where suffering comes from, where we experience suffering, because it's a lie. It's our imagination, our human imagination. So if we can identify everything we experience as human imagination, there's a certain release, isn't there? There's a relief that, yeah, maybe I'm hungry right now, and I don't have food, but that whole idea of being hungry and food and ingestion and stuff, it's a provisional idea. Yeah, if I don't eat, my human body will wither and die. Yeah. But that's not what life is about. That's not what my life experience is for. That's not why I'm here. It's not even how I'm here. It's my perception is all that matters. And if I can tap into that pure, clean, whatever adjectives you need, to manifest, to live in, even for a few moments, that completely detached knowing of the life process, rather than all of its various attachments, that is the Buddha of absolute freedom. You see, it's a mind state. So when he says, I achieved Buddhahood, I'll go on. The theoretical teaching states that the persons of the two vehicles can attain Buddhahood, thus avoiding one of the shortcomings found in the sutras expounded during the first 40 years and more of the Buddha's preaching. However, since the lifespan chapter had not been expounded, the true doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life remained obscure, and the enlightenment of persons of the two vehicles was not assured. In these respects, the theoretical teaching does not differ from the moon's reflection on the water or rootless plants drifting on the waves. The Buddha also stated, quote, "But good men, it has been immeasurable, boundless hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of nayutas of kalpas, since I in fact attained Buddhahood," end quote. Not him, not hairy little Siddhartha, but the state of Buddhism, the state of Buddha mind, Buddhahood. Not only does it long predate him, but the essence of the Buddha mind, the clarity, the non-instantiation of life, you can't calculate those numbers. That's why they're so huge. He wants to get you to think beyond time. Because that's what all these calculations are in Buddhism, aren't they? They're marking time. With this single proclamation, he refuted as great falsehoods his other statements concerning his own enlightenment. For instance, the Flower Garland Sutra states that Shakyamuni attained Buddhahood for the first time in this world. The Agama Sutra speak of his first attainment of the way, and the Vimalakirti Sutra says, quote, for the first time the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, end quote. The Great Collection Sutra states, quote, it is 16 years since the thus come one first attained the way, end quote. The Mahavarachana Sutra describes the Buddha's enlightenment as having taken place, quote, long ago when I sat in the place of meditation, end quote. So he used this method of teaching for most of his life, because it was easier for people to follow a human, a person. If you put everything on them, they would just fall away. They didn't have the courage or the wherewithal to seek their own enlightenment within their own capacity. This is the single greatest teaching of Buddhism, is that, as I often say, this is your Buddhahood, your Buddhism, Buddha life. You have it. You need to open it, discover it, and embrace it, experience it. No one can do it for you. No matter how much you read, unless you have your own insights as you read, and follow those insights to discover your own core, you will forever be wandering around. The Benevolent Kings Sutra refers to the Buddha's enlightenment as an event of 29 years ago. The Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, the introduction to the Lotus, quote, in the past I sat upright in the place of meditation, end quote. And the Expedient Means chapter in the Lotus Sutra says, quote, when I first sat in the place of meditation. It's not until the Lifespan chapter. When we come to the Lifespan chapter of the Essential Teaching, the belief that Shakyamuni attained Buddhahood for the first time in India is demolished. And the effects, enlightenment, of the four teachings are likewise demolished. When the effects of the four teachings are demolished, their causes are likewise demolished. Causes here refers to Buddhist practice to attain enlightenment, or to the stage of disciples engaged in practice. Thus, the causes and effects expounded in both the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings and the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra are wiped out, and the cause and effect of the 10 worlds in the essential teachings are revealed. This is the doctrine of original cause and original effect. It teaches that the 9 worlds are all present in beginningless Buddhahood, and that Buddhahood exists in the beginningless 9 worlds. Beginningless. This is the true mutual possession of the 10 worlds, the true 100 worlds and 1,000 factors, the true 3,000 realms in a single moment, or thought moment. Another important way to understand this teaching is that the fundamental formative energy springing forth from the quiescent state of potential is without the constraints of time and space, but rather integral to any, quote, formation derived from it. So, although we can identify the stuff of matter and time and space, all these have as their starting point the shared reality of preformative or quiescent energy. Okay, I thought I was going to do this in one video, but it's getting kind of long, so we will continue. It's vitally important that you get the importance of the Lifespan chapter, and this is the reasoning why throughout centuries the Lotus Sutra is seen quite obviously as the king of sutras, the top amongst the vast 80,000 teachings of the Buddha. The reason he taught those things, what he was leading people to understand, what he wanted them to understand from the get-go, but they didn't have the capacity to understand it. So the rest of Buddhism is all about cultivating and understanding the mind, like the Lankavatara is much more specific about the experience of the mind, the human mind, for a reason. He was still working up to the Lifespan chapter, hadn't done that yet. All right, thanks for participating. Ask questions, have comments, talk with one another. I want to see what you're thinking, and I'm sure we'll finish it with one more video. I've done most of my introductory chatting in this first part. But I need to drink something. My mouth is getting dry, and I don't want to make these videos too inordinately long. So I'll see you real soon. I may record it right after I get a drink of water here. I'm not sure. Take care of yourselves. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you so much for participating. I love your support and your engagement. Enjoy your practice. Go to Gohanzen and chant with a mind to experience your Buddha mind. Experience your Buddha nature. It's yours. Demand to experience it. Go to Gohanzen with that kind of resolve. See you soon.